This message of showing up as a persistent pleaser is given to young girls at a very early age. When we as young girls said no, it was like we were given some message, subtle message that we were being selfish. That layers over time and is reflected back to us in subtle and not so subtle ways. We talk about that research in our book about when women are not saying yes to, let's say, office housework, it is reflected negatively in the workplace. So there are real life implications for this place of persistent pleasing or being a people pleaser.
To have the bandwidth to be kind, to be generous, to be innovative, to be creative, like that takes mental space and energy. We can't just pretend it's just going to happen. And so if we can sort of get rid of these things that don't matter, that take up so much of our energy, we can start devoting that precious energy to the things that we need to do.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Ulrich, and I'm also the founder of what we think is the world's only good news website with the promise of no politics and no ads for 11 years. At the Goodness Exchange, we've written thousands of articles about what's right with the world. There is an enormous wave of goodness and progress well underway in the world that we're just not hearing enough about. We're going to get to some of that today with our wonderful guests. Two gals that I've known before the pandemic in different ways. I've known Lindsay for years previous to that. And I think maybe we met about the same time, Miriam. These two have written a new book called Ditch the Ditties. And it is a profound guide, yet really playful, about how women can shed the burdens that we're often carrying in a complicated world because of all the things we think we should be doing. The way our society is structured, it's left women asking themselves or even expecting themselves to manage countless details for others in this world. Now, most people know exactly what I'm talking about, but we take it for granted. And maybe we're not even aware of the constant navigating that we're doing for the lives of others. And this book, Ditch the Ditties, helps us sort out the way we can truly manage our time in a way that brings us fulfillment. And we can still do the things that are important to others. But the point is to get curious, ask ourselves some fresh questions, and then start sorting out what we're doing just because we think we're obliged to do it and what will actually bring us joy. So that's my take on it. I want Lindsay and Miriam to correct me. I've read the book myself. It's absolutely fabulous. I bought 3 copies. I already gave it to 3 young women in my life. Just to give you a little background, Lindsay is a trailblazing professor at Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont. She holds the Robert P. Stiller Endowment Chair of Management and leads the David L. Cooperrider Center for Appreciative Inquiry. And she has been inspiring global change with her innovative spirit for decades. I interviewed the David Cooperrider a few years ago before the podcast was super polished, but I'm going to make a link in the show notes to that interview as well. Now, Miriam is a transformative organizational coach. That's how I know Miriam, as this wonderful person who steps in and can see the 100,000-foot look and help people appreciate what they've got and what they can let go of. She's also an appreciative inquiry practitioner and co-founder of Ditch the Ditty. And I think Miriam's gift is in bringing clarity to things. That's what I've noticed about her work. And she's got a lot of heart that empowers women to navigate life in a way that leads with curiosity. And of course, that brings us back to the book because it's getting curious about what we're doing with our time that will bring us to a new level of joy. So together, you two are doing amazing things. I feel just so honored to interview you and help people know that this book is out there and it's a lot of fun and it can set you free. So welcome, Miriam and Lindsay.
Thank you, Linda, for having us.
Thank you, Linda. Great to be with you.
We're going to start with a question that I think is like the umbrella thought here. Lindsay, maybe we'll just start off with you. There's a quote in the book where you say, "This isn't about saying no to others. It's about saying yes to yourself." This is a really huge distinction that I don't think we're given as women when we're young and all the way up through trying to develop business lives. Talk to us about this. Doing what matters, not trying to do it all, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And that is, I think we can't restate that enough. It isn't about saying no to others. It is about saying yes to yourself. Like you said, what a what a shift that really for us as women that have been so conditioned and sort of grown up with messages that really reinforce us to put others' needs before our own, right? So whether that is people pleasing, perfectionism, all of the things that from a very young age, we are implicitly and explicitly sort of rewarded and reinforced for making sure that everybody else around us is happy and situated and taken care of. But it's like, put the oxygen mask on everybody else before you put it on yourself is sort of the message that we as women often get. And you're exactly right that this book for us it's not just about saying no or no to others. It is really about that reclaiming and getting in touch with what truly matters to us individually as women, and what matters to me might be different than what matters to you. And so it's not a one size fits all invitation, but it is a universal invitation to get really clear about the idea of boundaries aren't sort of a rejection, they're a prioritization, right? So how can we really get clear on what matters to us so that when we do say yes, it carries weight, and when we can becoming and saying no can become easier. We talk about this in the book. So ditties for us, this idea of ditties is a metaphor for us, right? Ditties are those things that are unnecessary and unwanted. We do not want to do them. We don't have to do them. But so often as women, we say yes to all of those things that other people ask us to do. Again, sometimes even implicitly and explicitly. So we talk a lot about how to get past that knee-jerk yes, that we just say yes to everybody else, which actually leads us to say no to ourselves. And so it's not just about saying no more, it's really about saying yes with intention. Because when we get really intentional about choosing what is in and what matters to us, the unnecessary actually falls away much easier. So I'll pause there. Miriam, you probably want to add to that.
Well, I really just love this, the place of intentionality is really where a lot of our work resides. And this idea of moving into whatever we're saying yes to with more energy, I just think we just found to be one of the most elevating and animating forces of our work is people really beginning to appreciate what they are living into. By setting aside these things they don't want to.
Intentionality, of course, I've heard because of it's a business organizational word. I don't even know what's that, but you don't hear it that often in just normal every day around the kitchen table. Define that intentionality because it's really important.
Yeah, what a great question. I think when we talk about being intentional, it is about that you are aligning up your decisions with clarity around what your values are, what your priorities are, and what your purpose is. And I think, we, in a lot of the work that we've done, most of us don't take time to really re-examine those. And so we end up being reactive in the decision-making process, saying yes to things out of a sense of obligation or reactivity, as opposed to with intentionality where we're really making a strong alignment to what's important to us. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think that word, Miriam, brings it up so much, as you were saying, Linda, too. It's clarity, right? Clarity is that intentionality that you're really bringing a clear sense of why am I doing this? For who am I doing this? For how long am I doing this? Whatever that clarity of agreement and clarity of purpose.
What I think you're reminding me of is this shocking realization I had when I was about 40, 3 kids, big dental business. My husband's also a dentist, that everything I choose to do, there's only so much time in the world. So I'm choosing not to do a whole bunch of stuff.
Exactly.
And it never occurred to me. I was just trying to do it all. I think I spent most of those years with 5 hours sleep.
That's such an important point, Linda. And I know we're not the first ones to say that, but that every yes to somebody else is a no to something. It's a no to exactly. We only have so many hours in the day, even though we would like to think otherwise. We only have so many days in the week, and we actually only have so many days in our life that we don't know what that's going to be. So time is our most valuable asset that we need to spend wisely. And you're exactly right. Every sort of yes that we say is taking time and space away from from something else. And every intentional, clear no that we give is making space for, that's the idea, for something that is valuable to us, whether that's time with family, whether that is a professional project that is really important to me, whatever it is. Exactly.
And, I want to say that, and maybe this is just my Midwestern upbringing. I want to say that this is not to say that we won't think things are important that we want to do for others, right? That if I want to do something for my daughter, I mean, that's not to say that those things aren't important. It's back to what Miriam was saying. It's just not zooming right in and out of things without even thinking. Not just zooming along and adding things to our to-do list without even giving it a thought. I think that's the way I would define the intentionality portion of it.
I really love that. And to your point, we are running on fuel because we are saying yes to so many things. At the end of the day, it's ultimately impacting the quality with which we are engaging in all of these things.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Seth Godin once said to me on this podcast, I'll link to that. That was a really good interview, and it brushes against this. He said, we're all spending our time with one foot doing whatever we're doing in the present, but we've got that other foot just reaching for the next thing. We're never truly present for the thing that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That I see in women every day in the office. Thousands of women's lives in the office through my professional career is how many things they're doing. All right. So we've got this down. Everybody knows we're not trying to take away from others. We're trying to give better to everyone, including ourselves, because we're just going to be more engaged if we're not just zooming through and accepting anything that comes our way. So Miriam, help us identify the ditties that are common in everyday life, because now we got to give people some examples.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so as Lindsay said, these are these tasks and asks that we don't want to do nor have to do, right? And so they show up in multiple facets of our life. And I think before I give examples of what they look like, we just remind folks that one person's ditty could very well be someone else's delight. So, and we'll get more into that, I imagine, in our conversation. But as it relates to just giving kind of basic examples of this, it could be anything from like going to a meeting, overcommitting to going to meetings, that you're just saying yes to going to a meeting because you don't want to look like a team. You don't want to look like you're not a team player. So you're not being there is not critical, but you just don't want to appear like you're not a team player. It could be saying yes to events or volunteer opportunities or projects when you're already really full. Or it could be like really overemphasizing polite responses. So people who like go out of their way of like, I've got to respond to every email. I've got to respond to every text today, and I've got to notice every social interaction, even though it might not be urgent or really important. I mean, they show up in all kinds of ways, and they often are residing in these habitual ways that we show up, because the messaging that we talk about in our book. I think one of the things that we would really emphasize is that, they're small commitments, but over time, a cumulative effect of taking on all these additional commitments really impacts our valuable energy and our ability to be creative thinkers. So there is an impact on saying yes to these things too frequently.
This is a good time to go into the decision tree. Can one of you comment on the decision tree? Because I was going to ask a question that circuitously gets there, but you guys have made it easy.
Well, the decision tree. So we love alliterations. That's like you'll see that throughout our book. So we created this decision tree. We call it the 4 Ds of decision making. And so the one that we know about as the ditties, which we've defined, but there are obviously other things that we have to say yes to in our day to day, right? That are not necessarily ditties. Like there are things that we have to do that we might not like doing, but it's a part of our responsibility. Like, doing laundry at home so we can have clean clothes the next day, or an expense report because it's in our job description. And we call that D a duty. It's just something that is ingrained in our day to day. So we are aware that we have to do it. So now we're like, okay, yeah, it is a definitive yes. This one we say, well, then see if you can bring some flair into it or bring some way to re-energize your connection to this D, this duty. The other one is what we call a deed. And it might not be something that you really want to do or have to do at first glance. But when you start to think about it a little bit more, you're like, you know what? It really gives me a unique opportunity. It aligns with my values. and my current priorities. So I'm going to say yes to this, but we really encourage people, when you do say yes, get clear about what you're agreeing to. This is an opportunity to do something that's time bound, really intentional, with really explicit outcomes outlined. And then the other D, which is, just the one that brings you joy. It's a definitive yes, lights you up. That's the delight. So those are the decision trees. That's the decision tree itself. And I wonder, Lindsay, if you want to talk about the process of going through the decision tree, because there are elements of that are really important besides just the 4 Ds.
Yeah, I so appreciate, as you can imagine, Linda, that words are important. That's part of even just the idea of having this idea of giving language to a ditty, right? As something that maybe we otherwise wouldn't see or recognize. And as Miriam said, these 4 Ds of ditties and duties and deeds and delights, we have this decision tree that really invites people to work through a reflective process to get clear on what is this ask that's before me. And the very first question in the tree, wait for it, I know, Linda, you know what it is do I want to do this? Right? So starting with that again, and it seems like such a simple, easy question, but again, especially for women that have been so conditioned to think that they should want to help others. I should want to do all of the things for all of the people, as you said, with one foot here and one foot sort of in the future of taking care of what is coming around the bend. That question of, is this something I want to do, isn't actually so easy. And we often don't give ourselves time for that. So much so that in the decision tree, we've built in pauses. we have a question. So it's a do I want to do this? Yes. A pause, taking a pause and asking yourself, do I really want to do this? And so almost with the invitation for like, that best friend at work or in your life that sort of tilts her head and is like, do you really want to do this? And taking the pause, actually literally taking time. And again, examining if this is something that you want to do. And of course, yes, if it's something you want to do, great, move forward. It's a delight to do it. If it's not something you really want to do, the next question is sort of inviting, is it something I have to do, right? As Miriam said, there are things in our life that, I might not love to do all the things, but because of other commitments, whether that's in my job, in my professional and personal life, family obligations, there are things that maybe I don't want to do, but I need to do them as a part of other commitments that I have. And so again, but we build in those pauses because sometimes, again, especially as women, we think that we have to do something when in fact, maybe we don't. Again, back to that habitual part of the decision tree is trying to invite people to interrupt the habitual yes, I should, the should that sort of runs in our heads, especially as women. And so, but again, if it's something that you have to do, actually, yes, as a part of your job, as a part of, being a parent, I don't love all of the things always that I have to do, maybe as a parent, but it's part of my relationship with and commitment to being a parent. Again, those then become clear sort of duties. And as Miriam said, that it's an invitation. How can I do this my own way? Bring my own flair to it. Bring something to it.
I love that flair notion.
Yeah.
I love that flair notion. I've been really deeply involved in our local zoning board and some things that are going on in our little town. And there was one particular board member that I've just been at odds with for 2 solid years.
Oh, no.
And I'm not at odds with people ever, but we just don't see eye to eye on things. And something happened last week. There was a meeting where he had to really step up and lead this group table with me at it and this other gal that and we're always on the opposite ends of things. And he did a magnificent job. He really moderated that table super well. And I thought, I've been trying to find some way to reestablish a relationship with him. I've been looking for an excuse for 6 months. And I didn't want to sit down and write a handwritten thank you note. Nobody does that anymore. And you know what? I just made myself do it. And it was because so did I want to do it? I wanted to do something to establish a relationship. in a different way. And I did find, I Google searched him, and I did find we have a tremendous thing in common. Gigantic. He builds post and beam houses, and we built 3. And that is an undertaking that is so crazy. And I bring this up in that I think there are things that belong in those first 2 categories. Do I want to do this? And is it a duty, a deed and duty, kind of thing, that are complicated? And my daughters, they were like, what? You wrote him a thank you note? No, he is a good person. People in town, except from my experience, people talk very highly of this fellow. And I just wanted a chance to start over with him. And so we can do some of those things. That's what I love about this pause. You do this over and over in your book. It could be very reductionist to look at some of the topics that you bring up. If you just, you could have made the book half as short, but you guys don't let us reduce it. You guys remind us that when we do that pause and we think a little deeper, I have felt nothing but joy since I mailed that thank you note.
Yeah. I love that story.
I love that story too. And I think one of the things I so appreciate about it is that you didn't come into that engagement with a level of resentment. I mean, it was just like this. It was an elevated sense of like, I'm in this for a hope of connection.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Of reestablishing a relationship. That's wonderful.
That's it. You guys have a wonderful way through this whole book. By the way, I haven't shown the book yet. This is the book. And I bought so many copies, I had to write this as my copy. But I have to say that you guys constantly challenge us to not just reduce it and move on, to just think about it, to get more curious. And that is a level of reminder that never can be done too often. Like, we always need to remind ourselves.
Well, I appreciate that so much, Linda, because that's a big piece of it with the rest of the decision tree and stuff, is that these aren't one and done decisions either, right? I mean, the rest of the tree is inviting exactly after the pause. We still need to is this something that matters to me? Is this something that aligns with my values? Is this something that's going to give me an opportunity? Like you said, it's a very clear an opportunity to reconnect with somebody. We're very purposeful in that. And those things are always shifting. What is important to me today might be different tomorrow, right? As my family grows, as my professional life changes and shifts. So this is like a constant conversation that we need to be having with ourselves, because not only do our decisions sort of shift, but the context within which we're making those decisions, we're always evolving, right? I'm a different person than I was 5 minutes ago when we started this call because I have no insights from you, Linda, right? So there's always that, how are we constantly in dialogue with ourselves in a very, again, back to that word, intentional way, so that we can have clarity in how we're showing up, why we're showing up, and then exactly whether it's a little behavior like writing a letter with a very intentional thing to, I don't know, starting a whole sort of, conspiracy for goodness movement.
Yes. Yes. It could be that thing that your town just really needs somebody to champion. And that's, we could go on down that path for a long way. But I want to talk, because this goes along with it, with there's some science to this. We're not just talking, you guys aren't just talking off the top of your head. You refer to science all through the book, and that's one of my hot buttons. I really appreciate folks who give us the science. And Miriam, can you talk to us about this science of overcommitment? Because this isn't just a nice new thing to know, this book. This is some serious stuff that makes us, at the end of our lives, or as we're going along, feel like life is worth living, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, this whole idea of what is the impact of our being in a state of overcommitment? Like, how does it meet and challenge our ability, our cognitive capacity? So there's this language around cognitive load, that we really only have so much capacity to hold information. And when we really engage in too many commitments, our cognitive load has been exceeded. Therefore, our stress response is really high. The cortisol is through the roof, and therefore our ability to engage in any real meaningful way is lessened. And those are the real implications of what happens when we get into a stasis or a state of overcommitment, I think is what we would say. And it's really interesting. I was thinking about this story. There's a story, we have Ditty diaries throughout our book. And there's one story in there in particular where we share a story where I was so resentful of having to make a particular recipe for a holiday meal. And I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do it. And I was so resentful. I got more calls about what that dish was. Tell you once the book went out there, and I had to remind myself, because we've been working on this material for 6 years now at least. And I was like, wow, because now I was like, wow, I must have been in a high stress state to have resented making that dish. And I think there are aspects of this work that begin to highlight what are the behavioral correlations when we have too many ditties in our life. What do we look like? And how are we, how is our essence being compromised in some way when we're in a state of overcommitment?
And how do we treat others? I think of parenting through that light. Like Liesl and I, my daughter, my co-founder of the Goodness Exchange, she and I do a lot of public speaking, and one of the groups we're speaking to a lot now are nurses. Talk about a group of people that is overcommitted and at work. But if you go to work and you're already this close to your ceiling, and then you get there and you're greeted by something, or God forbid, you should listen to talk radio on the drive to work, which, puts you so close to your ceiling, it the slightest thing. But think about when we come home to our poor families. My dad was a physician. He was one of those old school guys that gave everybody in town his phone number, and he was lovely. He delivered your baby, took out your appendix, the whole thing. But you know what? We got what was left of him at the end of every day. 1,000 people came to his funeral, and my brothers and sisters and I were just sitting there shaking hands, because the person they saw, all those patients, was not the person we saw. We got what was left. And that is I don't think you implicitly say that in the book, but I'm reminded of that, is that, if we take on too much stuff and our 14-year-old gets a C-, we're going to react entirely differently than if we are. Talk to us about that overcommitment and how it has an effect on some really important things in our lives.
In our relationships, I have to admit, I got chills. It's like we got what was left. Right? That is just like we're like moving through at the speed of light and just trying to show up in the way that we feel like society is asking us to show up, in these ways of being really helpful. But at the end of the day, these relationships that perhaps matter most to us are the ones that are ultimately, deeply neglected, not purposely. And it's really profound. Lindsay, what comes up for you in hearing this?
Yeah, I'm thinking, Linda, because I'm just fresh off of my grandmother just wrapped up her time with us on the Earth side last week. She was 98. And what a magnificent life. And my grandfather was a Methodist minister. And so the parallel of that, not a doctor, but he was that was part of the story of what was shared in our family, and my aunts and uncles reflecting on that, of how much my grandma had to hold because my grandfather was so busy in beautiful ways, caring and being with others. And so almost like the choice of what she was able to focus on was she had to hold everything. And so this idea of again, back to what we talked about, sort of what matters, the book, right? Doing what matters instead of doing it all. A big piece of it for us and for me, and, reflecting on these moments when we lose somebody, it becomes such a moment of pause in our life to sort of retake stock of what have we learned from these influences in our life. And again, what really matters to us. Because it's a reminder that we don't have forever, right? And so that's a big piece of it in the book for us and our own work. Everything that we've shared in the book is, as you said, is grounded in research, and it's grounded in our own practice. We are walking this walk every day, the three of us as authors on this, and everything we've put in the book we've done. And a big piece of that is the getting clear on what is essential and what matters to us. And part of that is getting clear on the from the experiences we want to have to the people that matter to us, because that becomes a lens through which we make decisions as well, right? And that shifts. I'm in a time right now, my son is a senior in high school, getting ready to take his next step in his adventure. And so right now, my priorities are highly dependent on how do I maximize my very special time with him in this space. And a year from now, when he is in a different space, right, my time and priorities are going to look different. I'm going to have more time to maybe do things that are going to be. And so that's what we talk about, this idea of it being a constant evolution and a constant conversation, because again, what is important today might shift tomorrow, from everything from health to people to put jobs to these chapters in our life, right? Like right now, I am very clear that my priority and our priority as a family has been as much time as we can together, knowing that, and again, as the reminder of saying goodbye to my grandma, that time is fleeting. And so we have to take these moments as they come. And so that's really been an important piece of this, of the getting clear on exactly as you're saying, like how do I want to use my time? So it's not that he doesn't get what's left of me. He gets what's best of me.
Yeah. That's a really, it's a really big deal that I just kept going back to through this whole book. Okay. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about things like getting to the essentials, like how do we get there? And this whole thing about people pleasing. Oh my gosh. We've got to sort that out. So we've got a lot to talk about. Let's take a quick break. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time, or maybe even the emotional stamina, to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back with Miriam Novotny and Lindsay Godwin. These are two amazing women that I've known for years who have worked for 6 years or better working on a book called Ditch the Ditty. This is my copy because I bought so many copies for others that I had to mark my own. And I got to tell you, this book will set you free. And it's going to set you free because it's helping us ask some better questions. There's this great part where you say, where you talk about the pause. So many places we've just got to pause. We're just zooming through life and all this stuff just happens. And then we go to bed exhausted every day and get up and do it the next day. And I think at the core of that very often is this people pleaser impulse. Miriam, what do you got to say about the people pleasing?
I know her very well.
Are you one? Are you one?
Yes. Yes, indeed. We call her the persistent pleaser in our book. She's part of the what we call the Ditty dynamics. These socialized gender dynamics that influence why we say yes to these things we don't want to do. And the persistent pleaser is a very prominent character in this masquerade that impacts why we're saying yes. And I think in our research, it wasn't surprising, but it was reinforcing that this message of showing up as a persistent pleaser is given to young girls at a very early age, and that we're when we as young girls said no, it was like we were given some subtle message that we were being selfish, and that layers over time. And is reflected back to us in subtle and not so subtle ways. And, we talk about that research in our book about, when women are not saying yes to, let's say, office housework, it's reflected negatively on them in the workplace. So there are real life implications for this place of persistent pleasing or being a people pleaser. And it also impacts, I would say, not only what we're saying yes to or why we're saying yes to something, but it also impacts how we say no. If we are really living in a place of trying to please others, we find, I am queen of this, I would say, apologizing for my no. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, but no. And I'm really, really sorry. But and the apologetic angel is alive and flourishing in my hemisphere. So yeah, that's just that's just an example. There are other dynamics that we talk about, self-doubt as being one of them. But I don't know, anything for you, Linz, that comes up around the people pleasing?
Yeah, I think that again, back to us sort of giving names. This, as we said, there's been so much research for decades on this socialized dynamic. Again, that girls just get different messages, sometimes unintentionally from their parents, from other people, but it is ingrained in our society. And part of it, the people pleasing, or this idea of sort of the persistent pleasing, and us having language and talking about it in this sort of personified way, a big piece of it is to normalize it for women, to be like, you know what? Nope, you're not crazy. You're not the only one that feels this way. This isn't, this pressure, to recognize and honor the pressure that we all feel to be helpful and pleasing to others, but to also universalize it, to sort of help to sort of lift that burden a little bit, to be like, you're not alone in this. In fact, we're all swimming in this. It both, again, is sort of this balance of honoring our experience as women and saying you're not alone. So then we can, again, sort of collectively look at our experience or hold a mirror up to it, sort of with a little bit of irreverence and recognize that we also then have choices going forward in terms of how we want to navigate that. That's almost like a shawl that has been wrapped around us of people pleasing, saying that that's what we need to do in order to feel good about ourselves.
I think it's like the lead vest in the dental office that they put on you before they take X-rays.
We're all carrying that around, right?
That's what I think. It's not a shawl; it's a lead vest.
Yes.
Well, I would say there. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I have two comments on that before we get too far down the pike. I have two daughters and a son, and my two daughters are, very feminist oriented there because, I was like fighting the good fight every minute of my life. And their brother is very sensitive because they wouldn't allow him to be anything else. But they, that whole thing, boys will be boys. Mm-hmm. That statement, that makes those two girls come unglued.
As it should.
It's like the girls are supposed to do everything just right, perfectly, and yet the boys will be boys.
Yeah, it's an excuse, exactly.
Are there other little social colloquialisms that are like that, just to reinforce
we
this?
talk about that in the book. We point to the nursery rhyme that has been ingrained in our heads over and over again of like sugar and spice and everything nice is sort of what girls are, right? And so the nice, right, and the good, the being sort of this sort of in quote unquote sort of good girl, right, has been literally for centuries has been in our in the nursery rhymes to the stories we can look to. Again, the messages that we've gotten from movies, from cartoons, from all of that. I mean, it's all, again, a reflection of our societal values of like girls should show up this way, boys should show up this way. And again, what is the behavior that we reward and reinforce that leads to us then, I am valuable, I am loved, I am worthy when I act this way. And so girls get that message of that. Again, if I am making other people happy, if I'm taking care of their needs, then I am valued and worthy of love.
Okay.
And I think too, there's this place of externalized. Sorry, Linda, I'm just going to say there's this other place of like, what happens then is then our value is externalized through seeking approval from others. Right. And then so you lose some sense of agency around like, well, where do I actually, find and discover my value? And, and beginning to understand that these boundary setting, practices are ultimately a reflection of self-worth. And that if we can really begin to,
huge. I have to mention here a book that is another adjunctive way of looking at this exact same topic. It's the book I'm a voracious reader. I'm constantly listening to books on tape every minute of my life. And I'm reading this book that goes very well with what we were just talking about. It's called The Three Mothers. Have you heard about this book? It's the story of the mothers of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and James Baldwin.
Wow.
Do you know that nothing was ever written about these women? Their dads were not so good. Those three men were like who they were because of their mothers. Mm. And I can't, if somebody likes this topic, I can't, they put up with a lot. I have such a hard time with violence because I have violence in my history, childhood trauma. But I am making myself listen to this book because I want to know who these three women were, to raise those three men at the time when they did. And it really comes down to a lot of what you're saying. They found, these three women, I'm only about halfway done, found that perfect balance between accepting all these narratives about who you're supposed to be, and then on some things just standing firm, just saying no, or just finding like a third way to be. Of course, these were Black women that didn't have any agency in those days at all in a world that was just horrific. But when we learn about other people who have, that's what those women did. They ditched the ditties in their life. They could only do that and raise all these children in such wonderful ways. So I just wanted to take a little sidetrack there. If folks want another good book to listen to. Okay. I want to ask you about this one. This was a little side one. So how I've found I say no, and I'm just, I could take a 2x4 and hit myself over the head, but you know what I do to say no? I say no, but here's what I could do.
Yes, we have a name for that, Linda. It's called the magic wand. The sense that even when I'm saying no, I feel like I still have to be the fairy godmother that fixes it. Right. And so again, even just the weight of that and recognizing that, and again, there are times and places when, depending on the relationship and different things we talk about, yes, scaling your no. And sometimes you do want to help somebody. You can't do it. Yes, you want to help them. But again, when it's that knee jerk, just I feel like I can't say no without still solving their problem for them, then that is that's still a heavy burden that we carry. And again, we call it the magic wand. It's like I have to be your fairy godmother and grant your wish, even though I have to tell you no. And we have stories after stories in the book too of people doing that, where it's like you bend yourself over backwards, tie yourself into a knot, like trying to figure out the resources or trying to find somebody else to like be their yes, even if you're going to be their no. And that's hard.
Oh, it's still doing the same thing. It's still adding to the to-do list that we've got for ourselves. Exactly. So let's get to that. Lindsay, talk to us about the getting to the essentials.
Yeah, this is such again, a key part of that. Back to that decision tree. Like the first question is, do I want to do this or not? And so we spend a lot of time, again, recognizing that as women, we might not always have given ourselves that pause, that time to get clear on that. And for us, that's what we call, what do I really want to do? What really matters to me? We call those our essentials, right? We've had those conversations. It came, in COVID, we were talking about essential workers, essential things, and it really became this word that for us, if ditties are all the things that we don't want and don't need, essentials are those things that are core and just they are us, right? They are the things that matter to us. And so we do a lot of work where we invite people to get essential about their essentials and actually reflect on that. Again, there's a lot of research behind the idea of taking time, doing the self-reflection to get clear on what matters to you, what are your priorities, helps you to be a better decision maker, be a better colleague, be a better collaborator, be a better parent, all of these things. We lovingly talk about the essentials as being we talk about the ABCDEs. And we talk about this where essentials, recognizing Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow long said we have lots of different things. It's not that there's just one thing that is important to us or that matters to us. And so sort of building on this idea again, in the research, we talk about essentials as being A, B, C, D, E. So A's are those achievements, right? The things that the things we want to be remembered for, right? The legacy that we want to leave behind. B as for the belongings, recognizing that there are certain things that maybe have no monetary value to other people, but they matter to us. I'm thinking about like my grandmother's ring that she just, left behind. And it doesn't, mean anything to anybody else, but sort of like if my house was burning down, I'd be grabbing that, that ring, right? And so thinking about the material possessions that are important to us, characteristics, the C is characteristics, sort of the how we want to show up, how I want other people to think of me. Do I want to be thought of as kind, as generous, as, what is it that are the characteristics? D is for the darlings. We've already talked about this, about the people in our life, right? Like who are the people in your life, your darlings that matter to you, that you want to spend time with, that you want to prioritize so that, again, they're not getting the leftover you, they're getting the best of you. And then E are those experiences. What are those things we want to do, right? That we want to engage in that actually brings us joy. And so we have those essentials, and we have a variety of different questions and reflections for people to get clear about that. But again, this idea of it's not a one and done conversation, essentials, because just as we said, like in the seasons of our life, some of that's sort of constantly changing. The who matters to me, the what do I want my legacy to be, the material things that are important to me shift as we shift and grow. So this conversation of what is essential is not a one and done, just like a pause isn't a one and done. We have to continually have this conversation with ourselves so that, again, we can bring that clarity of intention, because then our essentials become like our glasses through which we are looking at decisions as they're coming my way all of the time, right? Is this going to move me forward on the things that matter to me? And so then we talk about, how can we then bring these essentials in not just big ways, but small ways, in everyday small ways, right? So that we're not just having an essential life is built up of essential years, which is built up of essential days, which is built up of essential moments, right? How am I choosing being intentional and essential in how I am using my time every day so that I am ultimately crafting a life, hopefully of more delight, as Miriam said, right? That we can look back across it and have the delight that we all want to have. What would you add to that, Miriam?
Oh, I don't, Lindsay, honestly, I think you've just done a beautiful job capturing the importance of it. And I think, in coaching individuals, both leaders and just people in their personal lives, I think what's really fun about the essentials is that you can use them in micro and macro ways. And I think that's just really powerful and dials into this then, how does it impact the quality of my day-to-day? Mm-hmm. And what do I want the quality of my day-to-day to be?
And you've got some really important questions that you have us have handy, Mm-hmm. Talk to us about some questions that help you. Miriam, I imagine as an organizational folks, someone who helps folks with their organizational complexities, mm-hmm. that's as important in our working life as anything, right?
Absolutely.
Asking ourselves about the essentials. I know in that book, the mothers of those three great men, that's what they had to do every minute, pretty much, is ask themselves what was essential. Like in the moments when Ku Klux Klan were standing outside their houses, they had to decide what was essential. Even just getting up in the morning and trying to get 9 kids out of bed and to school, you had to decide what's essential. Talk to us about some questions that you use in your personal life to kind of remind you as you're going through the day.
Well, I mean, one of it, this whole concept of what do I want my experience to be in this moment or through this particular scenario? How connected do I want to be with the people around me or the process? I mean, I'll be very honest. Recently I had a second round of breast cancer, and it shifted what was important to me overnight. And it made me really begin to rethink, well, how do I want to go through this experience? What level of engagement do I want to have with the care providers, with my family, with my colleagues? And those are, it was less about, it was like, and the who do I want to be in this? And that was really powerful. And that this place, we've been doing a lot of conversations around what is essence, like what is our essence and how do we want to let that live through these experiences? So, there are a lot of, there are tactical questions, and then there are questions, I think, that are really transformative questions that can begin to shift our perspective and help us set down some of those socialized gender dynamics that maybe are implying I should go through it this way instead of going, actually, I want to go through it this way, my way.
That's huge. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I can tell people as a takeaway from the book. Like over on this wall, when I first discovered appreciative inquiry, probably 7 years ago, one of the biggest questions I use at those zoning board meetings and in any kind of a confrontational situation I'm in is whenever I feel the tension going up around me, I say, wait. What do we all want more of? And that one question from appreciative inquiry has helped me out of 1,000 jams. That's what I love about your book. You've got certain questions that we can just register right here in the old noggin, and they're a tool when these moments happen where we have to decide, how do we want to go through this next experience, or how am I going to react to this with my 13-year-old or whatever. So that's another thing I don't want to skip over, is this book is a lifesaver. I think it's one of those books that you can just crack open anywhere, like when you've got a problem. I'm thinking of something in my own life right now, and I just opened here to page 124, and I love this. I could probably read this if I happened on Molly's story, and I could probably read her story and take something away that I can apply to this issue I'm having. So, okay, here's something I really want us not to miss. You talk about sprinkling essentials throughout your day, Lindsay. Like this is how we keep it going and keep it joyful and keep it delightful. Talk to us about consciously sprinkling essentials.
Yeah, that goes back to this idea of, as Miriam said, it's not just the macro, it's the micro. And it comes from one of our dear colleagues who was saying, it's about how do we say yes in small ways to the things that matter to us. And so sprinkling it for me is, it is like almost imagining my like confetti throughout my day of like the little things that bring me joy, that literally bring a smile to my face, that fill my heart. And so for me, it's the finding the, what is the extra 5 minutes that I can spend with my son today on, just he and I. That's literally sometimes texting some memes to each other, because it brings him joy. It brings me joy. And so it's not about, putting something on my calendar. It's about, I have 5 moments. I'm thinking about him. I'm going to send him a funny note. It's about, just as you said, I love you sort of imagining you sort of every waking moment, listening to a book or reading a book or something, right? It's the filling the time in between, right? The time in between, there's no time in between. That is our life, right? We often think of, but it's not that there's time in between. That is our time. And so it's thinking about that in a way of, it's not, I have 5 minutes right now, I'm going to read a book. It's like, I want to read a book. I'm going to take 5 minutes right now to read that next chapter. And so, or, my puppy right now is sort of at my feet and, reminding me that, he's one of my essentials of spending time and that. And so it's taking that extra walk outside with him, or taking 10 minutes to, throw a ball with him. Again, not because it's on my calendar, but it's because that's what's important to me. And so thinking about your day in that way is, again, it's not about over programming something else or putting something else on your calendar. It's about recognizing that, and just as we said, it's sort of the metaphor, right, of the jar with the rocks and you pour the sand in, right? And it's like, whatever. So it's like our life is the sand. It is the everything that fills around those big things. And so rather than thinking it's, my day is this meeting and that meeting, no, your day is this. And how do you want to fill that up? And again, this idea of sprinkling, it just became a verb for us that helped us again to metaphorically sort of see our time differently. And so that sprinkling of those essentials, whether that's time with people, whether that's something that brings us joy, learning something new, that can happen over a day. And then you can think about what is an essential day? What is an essential week, right? What is an essential vacation that I want to take? What is an essential day at work, so that we are really starting to, again, prioritize and shift, as Miriam, you were saying, sort of from that externalized somehow that we have become, driven by this externalized, whether it's my calendar or this or my boss, and bringing it more into the intrinsic, sort of self-directed. We are the drivers of our own bus of our life, and reminding ourselves that.
And I've got to bring this word in here because I've been curious. It's my lately word, savoring.
Ooh, I love that word. Yes.
I think the way you've explained it with the sand around all the rocks in that jar analogy and so many things you just said reminds me that when we're in these moments where we're doing something that it really brings light to our life, we can savor it. It's so important, the whole savoring part of the equation. Like my husband, I really found out the other day, he used to listen to like sports talk radio. I'm retired from dentistry, but he has this 15-minute drive in, 15-minute drive out every day. And the other day I got in his truck and turned on the radio and he's listening to XFM Spa. And I thought, well, this is weird. Usually I'm changing the station as fast as I can because he's got all these people shouting about football or basketball or something. And the last 2 times I got in his car and it was on Spa. So I asked him last night and he said, I'm trying to savor that 15 minutes ride in and out more these days. I think there's
really lovely.
There's a quality in your book that would allow us to savor more.
Right. And so when we are distracted because of being in a place of overcommitment, where we're in a place of like stress and our working memory maybe is not as docile as we'd like it to be, like we miss that opportunity to be really present and to bring the best of us forward and to have that relational moment, whether it's just with nature or with another human being, be more deeply impactful.
It reminds me of one of my favorite artists and poets. Miriam knows this, that I love Brian Andreas. He used to be with Story People. And one of his quotes, I have it in my house, it says, "Time stands still best in moments that suspiciously look like ordinary life." And so it's exactly that, right? This is our order. This is our life. And I love that savoring, the becoming, that bringing that appreciative eye, talking back about appreciative, is bringing that appreciative eye to exactly what do I want more of in this moment, and that is our ordinary life. It's when we find those moments.
I'm telling you, what
do
we all want more of? Okay, I'll just own it. I'm taking notes here, and I want people to know that there's going to be a beautiful long article written about this interview on the Goodness Exchange. You won't have access to it on Spotify or Apple or any of that, but if you go to listen to this or watch it, on the Goodness Exchange, you're going to get this article, and I'll put anything that you and I have mentioned, the books I'm mentioning, anything you guys are mentioning, we will put links to all that over. Speaking of that, what are you guys, we're readers. A lot of the people that listen to this podcast are readers. What are you guys reading that's bringing you joy these days? Because that reading, even if it's listening, like the podcast you're listening to, give me anything that you're spending time in your mind.
Okay. It's a window into my world.
Well, it's a savoring thing, like sometimes I just had somebody the other day, a guest on the podcast, told me that what he was savoring with his time. He's Carl Honore. He's the originator, the founder of the slow movement. You know how people talk about slow travel, right, slow cooking. Mm-hmm. So that is called Carl Honore. And he was the one who said to me the other day that he's decided to find moments to savor. And cooking has become his time to savor life and the moments we have. And, it's so easy to look at cooking as a utilitarian thing, or reading, or, like you can really turn anything into a transaction.
It's so true. I mean, a couple of different areas. I'll just populate a few things that I'm reading. One in particular, I'm just thoroughly enjoying. It's The Writer Who Inhabits Your Body. It's this beautiful book by this woman, Renee Gregorio, who is an Aikido instructor, a coach, and a poet, extraordinary poet. But it resides in this interest that, I have in lifelong work around embodied experiences. But, a big part of our work, I would say, too, is like this idea of like how we embody the decisions we take on, how we carry them. We even talk a bit about, wearing our decisions and what it feels like to live in that yes, live in the no. So that's one. And then I'm reading another book about grief and experience of grief, which is really it's a very powerful way through looking at transitional moments and letting go.
Yeah, I'll link to this too. I interviewed a grief coach quite a long time ago, 3 years ago. So it won't be at the level of quality of this episode, but it's worth people seeing. I'll add that to the show notes for this as well.
I would love to. I'll send you the name of the book, the full title of the book, but okay. I'd love to hear it. I mean, it's such a gift for people who can help others navigate those cases. Yeah.
She reminds us that grief is it's not the only emotion you can feel when you're feeling it. Like that there's room to hold lots of different things in our hands, and she's just amazing. Yeah, I can't remember how I got a hold of her. That. How about you, Lindsay? What are you listening to or reading these days?
I am two things that are on my Kindle at the moment and in conversations in our house too. And part of I just love his work. Rick Hansen, who is he blends sort of neuroscience and mindfulness and positive psychology. He has lots of best-selling books, but he wrote, I think, the Buddha's Brain. But anyway, the book that I'm reading. Yeah. Right now is Resilient, How to Grow an Unshakable Core of Calm and Strength and Happiness. It's work that I've known, but I love how he brings it together. And it's also work as a professor that I'm bringing more resilience work into the classroom for my students. So I'm always looking for, again, ways that people have brought together the neuroscience with techniques and making it accessible. And that's what I love about his work is one thing, right? So really looking at, and again, in these times that we are all navigating. Again, this is like, I'm like, this is stuff I study and know, and it's stuff that I need to study and know. So it's like lifelong learner of like, I've long studied resilience. I've long tried to practice resilience. And I've loved his work, but that's one book. And then my husband has just brought in this book into our lives that we are exploring together. We're sort of part of our resilience and sort of our, how do we better take care of ourselves? It's called Breath by James Nestor.
I interviewed him about that book.
Heart, right? And it's like,
yes.
And so talking about, right, like how do we talk about the most transactional thing we've done is like we've transacted like as a species breathing. So how do we reclaim, it's not just the savoring of breath, but really, again, the science behind it is phenomenal of like, we actually, how, at a cellular level, we actually, function better when we breathe differently than how we, I'm like breathing through my mouth and like I'm a mouth breather and all of that. But so it's not just, about the sort of meditative breathing, but really getting into the history, the science, and the impact of talking about, let's not be transactional with the air around us. Let's actually like do what our bodies were designed to do so that we actually function better at a cellular level, let alone at a spiritual level. And so, the breath.
That book. Okay. I'll put a show note to that because I know James Nestor. I've interviewed him twice.
Oh.
And he's got another book that's incredible about the ocean where he learns to free dive. Those are those people that can go down like three or four. So both of his books, but I interviewed him about breathe. And, myself, one of the daughters and my son now all sleep with a little piece of tape across our mouth. Really? So that's how serious we took that book.
I love it. Don't tell my husband that because that would be tape in my mouth. It's true. For other reasons, but because he cares about how I breathe, right? So,
Yes, it's so true. Okay. I'm so glad we took this little side. I'm going to start doing this with every single guest.
It's a great thing. Yes. Okay, can I add you one more book? And I know I'm not going to give it more, but I would highly recommend Joan Baez's book of poetry. The title alone, When You See My Mother, Ask Her to Dance. It is a beautiful.
I just got goosebumps.
Beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
My heavens.
Okay.
He is just remarkable. That's the one that,
Okay.
Either last thing I read before I go to bed or first thing in the morning. It's just so beautiful. Yeah, she's.
All right. Lovely. I could go on. Okay. But there's this major question I want to ask you. Okay. So balancing all these obligations and keeping the lids on all these pots and still, living neither of the three of us would say we haven't lived a good life and all that stuff. I think it takes some courage to get here, to do what you guys are doing, to propose something that's, socially probably a little on the unacceptable side. Like, what if all the women in the world stopped doing all this stuff for everyone else? Oh my gosh. Right? But like, what if what would a world look like where your idea actually panned out? There'd be a lot of people in some deep doo-doo. But I'm just making the point that it takes some serious courage for you guys to challenge the status quo and to come up with all these ideas and point to things that don't always make everybody look attractive. So there's some original courage there. I always like to ask people if there is a woman in their background that they got a kind of a sense of original courage, like this book that I mentioned about those men's mothers. I can guarantee you that's where Martin Luther King, James Baldwin, and Malcolm X got their courage. It's from their mothers. No doubt about it. And the way she goes back generationally, it was from their mothers' as well. So what about you two? Do you have some woman in your background that indirectly even that you've heard stories about who went against the grain and who did things that, over the scope of time changed history?
Personally, for me, I go to my my maternal grandmother, who actually passed away several years ago, right before my son was born. She got to see the in utero picture of him before he was born, but she didn't get to meet him. She was a primary caregiver in my life. She ended up being our next door neighbor. We lived in West Virginia, and I had, I'm the oldest of four. I had my brother, who's immediately next to me in age, was profoundly mentally and physically impaired through a story that we don't need to get into when he was very young, but led him to be completely dependent on us and sort of caregiving, sort of nonverbal, he wasn't able to walk or feed himself. And so she was this force that, and this whole experience in our family could have just, ripped our family apart and caused such cynicism and pain, which, I mean, there was a lot of sort of lingering grief in our household, but there was so much joy. And she was such the embodiment of that. She talked about an appreciative spirit. We were like, I think I was studying appreciative inquiry before I even knew, because talk about a woman who celebrated everything, like everything I did, but every laugh that my brother had, every, whatever, she just, it was like the world lit up. And so she just sort of faced this and, really became, again, such a primary force. And then I have other siblings, as well. And she was just this talk about, courage she was a teacher. she was an educator in West Virginia when, and being a woman anywhere, but especially a woman in West Virginia is not always the easiest thing.
It might have been at her stage illegal to be married and be a teacher at
and
that
so
stage.
she was born in 1919. So all of the things that she saw, I think, over her life, but just the way that her courage for me showed up in this. And I love this word savoring that we've had. It was like joy. Like she just, like everything, like every little thing.
She chose that.
That
was her chosen reaction.
Chosen reaction. And so, and it's not about, ignoring her, that my brother didn't have problems or different things, but it was, and I think that has sort of become ingrained in me in this sense of always looking for what is possible and celebrating what is there to be celebrated. And for me too, right, to bring that, she was the first person that really helped me have an appreciative eye for myself. In fact, it's so funny. My office, I have what I'm looking at right now is this wall of pictures, and she's right there. She's right there staring at me on my picture right now. And right beside it is a frame thing. The first thing that she helped me to sew when I was learning how to sew is framed right beside her. So she's right here with us right now. And in fact, my daughter is named after her. So she lives on in so many different ways. But that's
a great example of seeing somebody choose a perspective in difficult situations.
Yeah.
How about you, Miriam?
Well, I mean, in a different light, but I will often return to my grandmother on my paternal side, Gran. She lived to the ripe age of 99, grew up during the Depression, and had a way of going through life that attended to like noticing people around her and making sure they felt seen. And she would, I guess, like I always felt like that gift of like, I see you, you matter, and I'm going to go about ensuring you know that in ways that maybe the world doesn't pay attention to because I'm a woman, but I am going to make sure you're aware of it. And she would do the simplest things of like, she would, Sears Roebuck, right? She'd get on the customer service with somebody and getting some help. She would take the time to write the thank you note, to actually make sure it went, into the Sears Roebuck, they got it at headquarters or whomever. And she would, you remember those moments? I don't know if you had family members who would cut articles from papers and then like that, put it and then, write a letter. Here's the article. And I always loved receiving them because they would have the fragrance of Gran's home. I could still smell them as I opened it. But it was this loving presence that she was consistent. And even when things got really, really hard and challenging, where most families would fall apart, she somehow or another kept us focused on the fact that we only have one family. Family matters. And where everyone else more than likely would walk away and shame other people, she never did. And that takes courage because it's easier to be unkind, I think, sometimes. And it's takes a lot of courage yeah, to show up in a loving way. I love Gran so much.
Okay, so
God, thank
I
you.
asked that question. No, I
Mm.
totally, it's so great to be reminded of these
Oh,
souls that came before us and who is in us. Because I guarantee you're both walking around in this world with bits and parts of that is showing up for other people in other people's lives. We usually do emulate the qualities that we love most in others. And these women, they were strong. Like, I bet you could tell stories about both those women's lives that would just give us the shivers. I mean, what they were up against. Talk about ditties, like back to your book. These are two women that sounds like had this prioritizing down. And we haven't even talked about prioritizing. But that's another really, really important important aspect of the book is this balancing act that we're not saying heave ho to anything that doesn't bring us joy. We're saying that there's a balancing act, and there are plenty of people in our lives, like you just described, or teachers or whoever, who have shown us that it can be done. So we joked about it a minute ago, but what would a Ditty-Free society look like?
ooh, I love that. I think, boy, it would look like this like busyness value that's maybe underlying some of our day to day would be set aside, and that we would be living in a space where overcommitment wasn't what people were seeking, but a quality of engagement really having an impact on how we're showing, like, really meaningful impact. I imagine that relationships would be different. You wouldn't be getting what's left over. You might be getting the best of. You might be inviting the best of our colleagues because we're discerning in what's really purposeful and meaningful to us. So we're opening up possibilities for others. I think we'd hopefully see a decrease in stress. Like at the stress level, in a Ditty-Free society, Ditty-Free organization, perhaps we could help lessen the cognitive load. I mean, I think I think they're achievable. I really do. I don't know, Lindsay, what do you see in a Ditty-Free world?
Yeah, I echo all of that. And this idea too, as we said, it's like we are using our precious sort of cycles on things that don't matter. And so for me, it would be just, you said, Miriam, like whether that's at work, at home, we would be more, not just less stressed and happier, more creative, more innovative, because it's like we would literally have, and we know this from neuroscience, right? We're going to have the mental space to then to do the things that are going to matter, that are going to move us forward. Again, whether that's in our home space and sort of that, whether that's at work. I keep thinking about right now in terms of in organizations, how much time, I mean, we've talked about ditties in our personal life, but how much time, do we spend at work on things that just don't move the needle, right? That just aren't matter. And so it's like we are giving precious mental space and energy to these things. And so if we can remove that, it again goes back to, the Rick Hanson's work and at a neurological level, we are going to have, increased capacity to do the things that we need to do to face the challenges that we are facing as a global society, right? We need to be creative. We need to be, to your point, Miriam, we were talking about, and you were talking about, Linda, about sort of having we don't have the bandwidth really, we're kind of at, and so, to have the bandwidth to be kind, to be generous, to be innovative, to be creative, like that takes mental space and energy. We can't just pretend it's just going to happen. And like, if we have overbooked our brains with all of these things, we literally do not have the reps left over to do the things that we need to do, whether that is at home or definitely sort of in our broader world right now, where we need creative solutions for everything, right? From education to healthcare to social services to everything that we have. And so if we can sort of get rid of these things that don't matter, that take up so much of our energy, we can start devoting that precious energy to the things that we need to do.
I was listening to a podcast this morning while I was cleaning up the kitchen and stuff, and it's called Science Friday. And it came upon an episode where they talked to the guy who's in charge of the Science Foundation. And they were asking him in all this, we're not going to go into politics, but in all these efforts to make us more efficient, that there's all these budget cuts to science. And he said something I just thought was so interesting. He said, to your point, do you know how much science somebody's done the science on the scientists? And they do as much as 28% of their time is spent on clerical stuff, just like mindless ditties. Imagine the improvement in this world if top scientists in this world, all of them, could have 28% more time on the research and the work that they're doing.
Right.
And I don't think that only applies to scientists. I suspect that applies to dentists and organizational leaders,
right.
teachers.
Right.
Oh, talk about not having any time for reflection. How about teachers?
Right.
Yeah.
When do they get to reflect?
It's a whole other podcast we could get into. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Okay. I'm going to just mention this. You guys talk about two things we can get to talk about, but again, get the book. It's so good. You talk about the Ditty Detox. Can one of you just give me just a little short course on the Ditty Detox?
So the Ditty Detox for us is that is recognizing. So we talk a lot about not picking up new ditties, right? I mean, that's a part of the decision tree, right? Is how do we not bring new ditties in? But we also have to recognize that, we also have ditties already in our life, right? And so part of the Ditty Detox is an invitation and practices and reflections on how can you remove ditties that are already in your life? So not just not picking them up, but getting rid of other ones. How can we transform things? Sometimes we can transform things. It's also how do we prevent delights and deeds and duties from slipping into becoming ditties? So that's a big piece of it, right? So all of this is, again, the detox of how do we get rid of those things that we don't want. And so for us, that was really important. Sometimes even we call them sometimes advanced ditty ditching techniques of, how do I say no after I've already said yes? It's hard enough to say no, right? I mean, we have whole, how do you scale your no, and how do you, think about delivering a no and all of that. But so there's that. But then sometimes I've already said yes to something, and now I need to be you know what? I need to call in well, because I was unwell when I said yes to that, and I'm not going to do it now. And so what is that's part of the detox thing, right? Is how do we clean up the messes that we have made, as well as not taking on new ones. So that's a short hit on the Ditty Detox.
Okay. Well, I had to mention that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This conversation has been absolutely terrific, and we're talking about the problem a lot, but I want you to know that this book is just full of solutions. So thank you so much, and practical things like that where you can actually start. I think sense of humor is good in this area too.
It's our number one. It's one of our guiding values. Yeah, if you can't laugh,
yeah.
Right.
Oh, I would be
no shame. No shame. We're big on no shame.
Yes. Just own it. Move on.
Best medicine. Laughter is the best medicine.
Yes.
Sometimes we have to laugh at ourselves. So.
Okay, so I always wrap up the podcast with a question. I want you each to have a shot at it. When my book published, I was interviewed. It was at a crazy time. It was 6 months into the pandemic, and the title of my book is "Happiness is an Option." So that was a very funny book to publish 6 months into the pandemic, because nobody thought happiness was an option at that time. And I got all these interviews all over the country, 2-3 minutes. Man, it's a nightmare. What was I going to say in 2 or 3 minutes that was meaningful and all that? But I got used to having a wrap. And what if this interview had only been 2 or 3 minutes? I always think of people like you guys. You know so much, and you've got the an answer to the many complexities in our lives. Do you ever look at the news or hear somebody going on or hear something and then just put your head in your hands? What do you really wish people knew? That's what I'm trying to get at here. If you just had 2 or 3 minutes, what do you really wish people knew?
For me, it's how we end the book, actually. we talk about interrupting the myth or the belief of happily ever after is one of the biggest ditties for us to ditch. This idea that after I've helped other people, after I've gotten the job, after I've raised my family, after I've lost the weight, after fill in the blank. And I think that's one of the biggest invitations for me in the book and in this work. We in the book, it's not about happily ever after, it's about happily ever along. It goes back to what we've talked about, the savoring and the essential moments, and recognizing that we do have this one precious life. And this might be the only minutes I get, right? Back to like we've just talked about love and loss in our life. We don't know how many minutes that we are granted. And so how do we live a life happily ever along as whatever comes our way, right? Again, back to the choice. I have choice from my grandmother reminding me I can choose joy in even difficult moments. And so for me, that's the big takeaway, the big invitation is for people. And for me, it's the biggest reminder for me of how am I living happily ever along and choosing that intentionally and crafting that for myself and as much as I can in my circle of influence, so that whatever grains of sand I am blessed with, I am doing more of what matters most to me.
That is lovely. Yeah.
That's
How about you,
so
Miriam?
beautiful.
When you look at the negative news or you see something that just, it seems so unnecessary to the struggles that we all have, is there something that comes to mind that you really wish people knew?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think in the midst of the news cycle that we see, that ultimately, I think in this process of writing this book, ultimately community really matters. And like doing these experiences of change for within ourselves and within our communities and organizations, that's an iterative process. And it can feel very lonely if you're just doing it on your own, reading the book by yourself. But when you can engage in a conversation like we are doing with you today, or as it relates to simply being in relationship with Lindsay and Molly, I mean, that at the end of the day was the game changer, because you are an experience where people that love you. So you can trust when they hold up a mirror to you that you're like, oh God, there I am. And that they know where you want to be so that you're not walking that path alone. That is really an essential part of this work, I would say, is like how we do this together, shoulder to shoulder in partnership. And I would say that's probably been one of the most profound takeaways in writing this book with Lindsay and Molly for me.
Yeah, isn't that true? I mean, people don't succeed alone. Behind every Nobel Prize winner are about 110 really tired people. What we are built for is community and connection and all those sort of things. And this definitely is a book you could, I have a sister-in-law who's, she's a voracious reader as well. And she's always turning me on to cool things, like Swedish death cleaning. Do you know about that yet?
Yes.
Oh, that's a whole nother episode as well.
That's another episode.
Like, this is the kind of book you could do with somebody that you knew pretty well, or 2 or 3 people. You could just, take it in chapters once a week, meet on a Zoom for an hour and check your progress or laugh about your not progress or whatever.
We agree with that. So, I mean, and that's part of what we have, a free book guide up that we'll put the link up with that. That's part of if people want to have a book club or book conversation. Just as Miriam said, it's like, so much of this is like, how do you get your ditty ditching divas around you and help to be that mirror and stuff? So would love to share that guide with folks if it's useful.
Okay. All right. So that's how we'll wrap up here. Thank you very, very, very much. What should people do next? Like, promote yourself. I get interviewed all the time, and it always baffles me when I get a stern lecture before the interview that if I self-promote, they'll cut it out. And I'm going, self-promote? I've been giving people good news for 11 years without making a nickel. If you don't want me to mention the name of the Goodness Exchange on your darn podcast, what? I'm the opposite. self-promote away. Tell us what we should do next. Tell us what we can do to help.
Yes. Well, first and foremost, grab a copy of the book at your favorite bookseller, your local bookseller, on your Kindle. Share it with others. That is wonderful. Follow us. So we have social media. So we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So with both resources, with practical tips, with research, just sort of, again, with uplifting and hopefully useful ditty ditching tips and tricks. So follow us on social media. That's always helpful. And sign up. We actually have a newsletter where we send out ditty doses with again, more sort of diving into different tips and tricks and things that are relevant in the times that are happening, as well as upcoming events. We have workshops online, in person.
Is there a website for Ditch
And
the
our
Ditty?
website is it's ditchtheditty.com. So you can go there and find all of the goodies about the book guide,
Great.
about our upcoming events, and you can sign up for the newsletter there. So ditchtheditty.com is and follow us on social media is a wonderful thing, and spread the word. We love to tag us on social media. Like if there are stories or research or topics, tag us. There's so much good stuff happening in those spaces. And so we really, again, for us, it's about dialogue. So would love to hear people's stories of ditty ditching.
Anything else, Miriam, that you just feel like, oh, we didn't quite cover it? Because we had 15 really good questions over here. People keep seeing me looking sideways. Gosh. Is there any part of that I didn't ask that you just were hoping to sink your teeth into?
Boy, I feel like we really covered a lot of territory. Great. I really do. Yeah, it was a great interview. Thank you, Linda. Really.
Well, I just hoped to, give people a conversation amongst friends and help them have access to this really fresh way of thinking about this state of overwhelm that we're all having. And I could go on about the science, the folks that I've interviewed that talk at some angle of this overwhelm. And, maybe we can handle the negative news a little bit better if we aren't already our head on the ceiling from the too many things that we're doing that don't really matter.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. I hope that that the concepts and ideas and next steps that we've mentioned here will help you walk with a spring in your step this week. Every other week, we're interviewing folks around the world with fresh ideas like this. Some are authors, some have amazing, innovative projects that they're doing that the news isn't telling us about. Join us at the Goodness Exchange and the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast right here, and you will know that there is plenty still right with the world. Thank you so much.